It's July 1st, and this is the morning edition of MicAndBike. I've already dropped my son off at his camp, a YMCA camp today, and now I'm off to work. It's a pretty hot day yesterday. It's going to get up to about 90 degrees today, they say. So, today, I think I'm going to talk about racism. I'm listening to an episode of This American Life talking about car chases. And two of the car chases were situations in which minorities were treated improperly. In one case, there was a black couple in Chicago who were chased by unmarked police vehicle or something, and it was off-duty police officers in an SUV, I guess, who were shooting at them, and they thought they didn't know who these people were, what was going on, and got in a high-speed chase and drove to a police station for protection. And nothing really happened. The policemen weren't punished, and definitely doesn't sound very very kosher. And another case was in South Dakota with a white boy who shot a shotgun at some Indian girls, Lakota Indian girls from a basketball team who were driving a car by them, and I guess they'd thrown a smoothie at his car and he didn't like it. So, obviously racism exists. I mean, I would be the last person to say it doesn't. And some of these cases that they're talking about certainly had some aspects of it. Well, it's hard to tell. You see, here's the thing. Would that boy in South Dakota have shot his gun at somebody else, at a white kid who'd thrown a smoothie at his car? I don't know. Maybe he was really high-strung and kind of maniacal. But either way, I mean, shooting your gun at somebody is a bad thing, even if you don't kill them. It's a terrible thing. I guess this is kind of what bugs me about a lot of the approaches to racism. I totally think there should be severe punishment for people who hurt others or attack them. I fully believe that. What I feel less comfortable about is the whole concept of hate crimes, I guess, where the punishment is even worse because it's against a protected class or something like that. That is what I've never really felt very comfortable with. I mean, if we don't think the punishment for attempted murder is sufficient on its own merit, then we should increase it. Not say that in the case of where it was an attempted murder for a racial purpose, that it should be, the punishment should be more severe. That if it was just attempted murder because you were drunk and looking for somebody to kill indiscriminately, I don't see why it's any worse just because it was racism, motivated by racism versus something else. But I reiterate, I don't think, the good old boys should get off for crimes they commit against people of another race. I mean, that's terrible. So if police abuse a minority or something, I mean, they should be severely punished for it. Just as much as they should be punished if they abused someone who wasn't a minority. Either way, it's a terrible thing. And it just shouldn't be tolerated. But the whole thing of saying, well, if it was abuse that was carried out against a minority, well, then your punishment is 2 or 4 times greater than if it was against a non-minority. That's where I start wondering what the wisdom of the law is. I know in the US, one of the big differences with hate crimes versus other crimes is that hate crimes can be prosecuted in the federal courts because it's federal law, whereas things like assault and attempted murder are tried in state courts. Federal courts have much more of a reputation for, harshness and convictions. There is a perception that federal courts are harder, that they rule against defendants more frequently than the state courts do. So as a prosecutor, I guess you'd like to take the person you're prosecuting, if you can come up with a charge as a federal charge, then do it so you can take them to federal court. One thing I don't know the right answer to is how to deal with laws that are ostensibly non-racial in nature, but on paper, but in practice impact certain groups way more than others. So, laws that require that you can't vote without a driver's license, for example, on the face of it, it's not racist. It's not saying, hey, we won't let one group vote. But in practice, some racial groups don't have any driver's licenses. So it would impact them significantly, since very few of that members of that community have driver's licenses. None of those people, or very few of those people, will get to vote. Is that a racist law? I suppose it comes down to intent. If the intent was to disenfranchise some voters, and particularly from a particular community, then yes, that would be racism. Okay, but look at it this way. What if there was intent to disenfranchise, but not on a racial basis? They just said, well, hey, we know that most of the members for one political party, there's a higher percentage of people who vote for that political party who don't have driver's licenses. So let's pass a law that requires driver's licenses to vote. Well, they could still be trying to disenfranchise someone, but not be doing it on a racial basis in that case. But I would say that such a law still stinks. I mean, if the intent is to disenfranchise voters, whether there was racial animus or not involved, that's just a bad law. So I would definitely oppose that. So I guess, in general, I'm more for a somewhat colorblind view to racism. Punish all offenders equally, whether they are offending against minorities or anyone else. And so in that sense, don't make life easier for the majorities, and don't cover up abuses against the minorities. But on the other hand, don't make special laws that apply only in crimes against minorities, or that were intended against minorities. And I also think there's that racism or its impact on people has something to do with our own perceptions too. You know, if we feel done in by racism, then we are done in by racism. It's kind of like self-fulfilling prophecies. I remember working with lots of, at a company that had both Black Americans and Black Caribbeans working there, and I have to say the Caribbeans were getting promoted and working, I don't know, just I got along with them really well, and they seemed, at this one company I was at, which is only a handful of people, so it's not a huge statistical sample, but it really didn't seem like racism was hurting them. But some of the Americans, American Black people, were kind of like lower level manufacturing employees. Some of them complained a lot. I don't know. It wasn't. So as someone who'd never been around Black people very much, I mean, coming from Canada, there weren't very many in the communities where I grew up. It seemed like there was a big difference in the attitudes between these people, both of which would be Black, but one grew up in a different country. So I think some of it has to do with, you know, your attitudes. And I mean, I don't think it would be fair to say it was, the company was racist because it was, some of the Caribbeans were getting promotions faster than native Black Americans. But I mean, there is one big difference, is that, you know, I don't have a lot of insight as to the whole life experience of these people, you know. I only see a small window on their lives in the office. And how do I know, you know, if you live in a society that is fairly racist and you grow up in that society, maybe it does something to you and has an impact on your attitudes, you know. So there was definitely a difference in attitudes between the Caribbean Blacks and the American Blacks, but you know, that could be not just a personal choice, but a function of the culture you grow up in. And I did have some of these Caribbean colleagues talk to me about their lives in Barbados and so on, and how in those contexts that Blacks were the majority, and the few whites there were would go to school with them just like anybody else, and it wasn't really perceived as superior or anything. So, you know, maybe that's a very different way to grow up than being a Black American growing up in a segregated society where you see whites having more privilege or being better off and having the police treat you differently and everything else. But still, it does show that in the same society, in America, if you are black and you have a different that the way how your life turns out can be hugely influenced by your attitude. So even if it's true that some Black Americans have a hard go of things because of the culture that they grow up in, even if that's true, it's also true that if you somehow rise above it and have a positive attitude, you can succeed. Maybe harder for you than people who don't have that racial issue to contend with growing up, but at least there's hope. Well, I'm sure this sounds incredibly naive. These are the thoughts I have right now. And this ends another edition of Mike and Bike. See you all later.